Jungkook held his white cane tightly as he made his way through the crowded hallway of the university, his ears picking up snippets of conversations, the shuffle of feet, and the usual bustling energy of campus life. It wasn't easy being a blind student in such a chaotic environment, but Jungkook had learned to navigate his surroundings with sharp instincts and determination. He had to. Taehyung, on the other hand, was in the midst of his usual morning routine, strutting down the hallway with his group of admirers and friends in tow. His reputation as the college heartthrob had grown tenfold over the years, not just because of his looks but also his sharp wit, cold attitude, and the tendency to treat everyone around him as though they were beneath him. His eyes, usually indifferent, scanned the hallway for familiar faces, until someone suddenly bumped into him from the side. Tae's coffee spilled down his expensive white shirt, the liquid soaking into the fabric almost instantly. His eyebrows furrowed in frustration, and he whipped his head toward the culprit. Jungkook stood there, gripping his cane with both hands, clearly distressed. His head was slightly lowered, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. "What the hell, you stupid? Are you blind or something?" Tae snapped, shoving Jungkook's shoulder, causing him to stumble. Jungkook froze. He heard the anger in Tae's voice and felt a hostile push, but more than that, Tae's words struck him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, trying to form an apology, but the sting of humiliation held him back. He was blind, and for a brief moment, the crowded hallway seemed even darker. "I'm sorry," Jungkook managed to whisper, his voice shaking slightly, still trying to regain his balance. "What, just a sorry? You think a sorry is going to fix this? You just ruined my expensive shirt, ruined my day, and you think that's enough?" Tae barked, stepping closer to him, his voice laced with sarcasm. Jungkook's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to explain, to tell Tae that he didn't see him, that he wasn't able to see anything. But before he could, the crowd that had gathered around started whispering and laughing, feeding off of Tae's temper. His cheeks flushed in embarrassment, and his grip on his cane tightened as he turned to walk away. But Tae wasn't done. "Next time, watch where you're going, idiot. Or maybe just stay out of everyone's way if you're so clueless." Tae sneered, his words sharp and meant to cut. Jungkook didn't reply. He couldn't. The sting of Tae's words echoed in his mind as he hurried out of the hallway, trying to escape the humiliation that now weighed heavy on his chest. Hours later, as Jungkook sat in the quiet sanctuary of the library, his mind was still reeling from the incident. He ran his fingers over the braille pages of his book, but he couldn't concentrate. He was used to being underestimated, used to people not understanding his disability, but the venom in Tae's voice still hurt. Meanwhile, across campus, Tae was fuming, still upset over the ruined shirt and the embarrassment in front of his friends. Yet, as the day wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that began gnawing at him. His friends had laughed it off, calling Jungkook clumsy and careless, but something about the way Jungkook had walked away so quietly, with his head down, didn't sit right with him. Later that evening, Tae sat in his room, staring at his phone, thinking how to apologize to Jungkook for his rude behavior. as he heard from someone that Jungkook was visually impaired, but he hadn't realized it in the heat of the moment. The memory of Jungkook's quiet apology and his shaky voice echoed in his head, and guilt clawed at him. The next day, Jungkook was seated outside in the courtyard, his cane resting beside him as he listened to the sounds of students milling around. The sun warmed his skin, and he tried to focus on anything other than the knot of anxiety in his chest. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching and felt a presence standing before him. He looked up instinctively, though his eyes were unfocused, as if searching for the source. "Jungkook, I didn't know you were," a familiar voice said, but this time, it wasn't sharp. It was soft. Jungkook recognized the voice immediately. His heart sank, and he braced himself for more harsh words. But instead, Tae sat down beside him, the tension between them palpable. "I didn't know you were blind. I'm sorry," Tae said, his tone filled with regret. Jungkook stayed silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. His fingers twitched slightly as he tried to figure out if this was some sort of joke. Tae had been so cruel yesterday, and now he was apologizing. "I should have said something. But it wouldn't have changed anything, would it?" Jungkook finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tae flinched at his words. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he knew Jungkook was right. He'd been rude, dismissive, and hurtful without giving the situation a second thought. "I acted so harshly. I never should have treated you like that," Tae admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The vulnerability in Tae's voice caught Jungkook off guard. He didn't expect Tae, the guy who had everyone wrapped around his finger, to be sitting here, apologizing so sincerely. "You don't have to apologize. It's not the first time I've been treated like that. People just don't understand," Jungkook said softly. Tae's chest tightened at Jungkook's words. He suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to understand, to know what it was like for Jungkook, navigating a world where he couldn't see but had to rely on everything else. It stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt before. "I want to understand. If you'd let me," Tae said, surprising even himself with the honesty in his voice. Jungkook turned his head slightly toward the sound of Tae's voice, his lips parting in surprise. He hadn't expected this kind of vulnerability from Tae, the guy who had always seemed so indifferent, so untouchable. "What do you mean?" Jungkook asked, his brows furrowed. Tae sighed softly, unsure of how to explain the emotion swirling inside him. "I mean, I don't want to be just another person who makes you feel small. I want to know you better. Really know you." Jungkook was silent, processing Tae's words. His heart raced, unsure if he could trust this sudden shift in Tae's attitude. But something about Tae's voice, the way he spoke with sincerity, made Jungkook feel a warmth he hadn't expected. "Okay. But it's not going to be easy," Jungkook whispered, the tiniest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Tae looked at him with softness in his eyes. "I wouldn't expect it to be." And from that moment, something shifted between them, a fragile connection, built on understanding, one that Tae was determined to nurture despite his past mistakes. Over the next few weeks, Tae made an effort to get closer to Jungkook, trying to learn more about him, not just as a person but about his world, the world he navigated without sight. At first, Jungkook was cautious, wary of Tae's sudden change in attitude. But Tae was persistent, and over time, the walls Jungkook had built up began to crumble. They started spending time together after classes, not in the flashy, crowded spaces Tae was usually seen in, but in quieter places where Jungkook felt more at ease. At first, it was simple conversations, but gradually, those moments grew deeper, more meaningful. Tae began noticing the small details about Jungkook, the way his other senses seemed sharper, how he could distinguish voices in a crowd or navigate a room through sound and touch alone. One afternoon, they sat together on a park bench near the campus. The air was cool, the sound of rustling leaves filling the space between them. Jungkook was leaning back, his face turned slightly toward the sun, enjoying the warmth. "You never seem nervous. I mean, considering everything, how do you stay so calm?" Tae said, glancing at him. Jungkook chuckled softly. "Calm? I'm far from that. I've learned to adapt. When you lose something like your sight, you either learn to cope, or you let it consume you." Tae's chest tightened at the thought. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose his sight, to live in perpetual darkness. And yet, Jungkook moved through the world with such grace. "I admire that about you. You're stronger than most people I know," Tae said quietly. Jungkook smiled at that, though there was a hint of sadness in it. Strength isn't a choice when it's your only option. Tae felt a strange pull in his heart. The more time he spent with Jungkook, the more his feelings grew, feelings he hadn't expected. At first, it had been guilt that drove him to apologize, but now, as he watched the gentle expression on Jungkook's face, he realized it was something deeper. "You amaze me, Cookie. I didn't see it before. But now I can't imagine not knowing you," Tae whispered, his voice soft. Jungkook turned his head toward Tae's voice, his expression slightly puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." Tae hesitated, his heart racing. He had never been good at expressing his feelings, always hiding behind sarcasm and indifference. But now, sitting next to Jungkook, he couldn't hide anymore. "I think I'm falling for you." Jungkook's breath caught in his throat. His lips parted slightly, as if he was about to say something, but no words came out. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind, the rustling leaves, and the distant hum of life around them. Tae reached out, his fingers gently brushing against Jungkook's hand. "I know I've been rude to you in the past. I didn't see you for who you really are. But now I don't want to lose you." Jungkook's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that Tae would feel the same way he had secretly been feeling. But now, hearing the sincerity in Tae's voice, the vulnerability, he couldn't deny the flutter in his stomach. "I don't know what to say," Jungkook whispered, his fingers trembling slightly under Tae's touch. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me show you," Tae said softly, his thumb gently caressing the back of Jungkook's hand. Tae leaned in slowly, giving Jungkook time to react, time to pull away if he wanted to. But Jungkook didn't. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his lips parting as he felt Tae's breath ghost against his skin. And then, softly, their lips met. The kiss was tender, tentative at first, but it grew with each passing second. Tae's hand moved to cradle the side of Jungkook's face, and Jungkook's fingers curled into the fabric of Tae's jacket. There was a warmth between them, an unspoken understanding, as if the world around them had melted away, leaving only the two of them in that moment. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested against each other, their breaths mingling in the cool air. Neither of them spoke for a while, letting the silence between them fill with the emotions they couldn't quite express. "I've liked you for a while. But I never thought you'd feel the same," Jungkook finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Tae smiled, his thumb brushing softly across Jungkook's cheek. "I was an idiot for not seeing it sooner." They stayed like that for a long time, sitting in the park, their hands intertwined. And for the first time in a long time, Jungkook felt at peace. He hadn't expected to find someone like Tae, someone who saw him not just as a blind student, but as a person, as someone worth loving. Months passed, and their relationship deepened. Tae grew more attentive, always mindful of Jungkook's needs, but never treating him as fragile or helpless. He supported him, encouraged him, and most importantly, loved him for who he was. One evening, they sat together on the rooftop of Tae's apartment building, the night sky stretching endlessly above them. Jungkook rested his head on Tae's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You know, I used to think that love was something you had to search for, something you had to chase. But with you it just happened. And I wouldn't want it any other way," Tae said, breaking the comfortable silence. Jungkook smiled, his fingers lacing with Tae's. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who makes me feel like I can see the world in a different way." Tae pressed a soft kiss to the top of Jungkook's head, his heart swelling with love. "I love you, Cookie." Jungkook tilted his head up, his sightless eyes shining with emotion. "I love you too, Tae." And as they sat there under the stars, wrapped in each other's warmth, they knew that no matter what challenges life threw their way, they would face them together, hand in hand. Their love was not just a bond between two people, it was a connection that transcended sight, a love built on trust, understanding, and the kind of acceptance that only comes when two souls truly see each other for who they are. The end.